Chapter 34. Redefining Priorities. As Ryback predicted, the mountainside is rife with wild Pokémon as they make their way to the nearest ranger outpost. Thankfully, 4 Pokémon are enough to scare off most they come across, and the one Geodude foolish enough to throw a rock at them is killed instantly by a blast of water from Ryback's Poliwhirl. Was that necessary? Leaf asks, face pale. Seriously, that would have been an easy catch. Blue frowns at the Geodude, whose entire body has turned a cracked mottled white. He's clearly wondering if he should try to catch it anyway. No distractions, Ryback says without breaking stride. The last thing we need is to call attention to ourselves with a prolonged fight. The paleontologist continues to set a brisk pace, clearly intending to get them to safety before the sun sets. Red privately agrees and jogs to keep up with him. He remembers that the nearest ranger outpost isn't far in absolute distance, but the mountain road twists and turns so much it would take them the rest of the day to get there if they're lucky. Charmander follows on all fours, looking better for the rest he got earlier, but Red still doesn't want to tax him any more than is necessary with wild encounters. Luckily, they only encounter a few more, which are ended just as swiftly. A Sandslash gets scared off by Maturin and the Poliwhirl's water guns, and a pair of Zubats swoop down at them only to be chased off by an Ember and a cloud of sleep powder from Charmander and Bulbasaur. About an hour into their travels, Ryback's and Red's phones chime. Red checks his and sees an email with an attached form from Ranger Sasaki. They stop for a quick rest, and the two open the forms, which ask for virtual signatures to verify witnessing the Renegade branding. Red hesitates a moment, then signs it. The document is simply a confirmation of what occurred, not a second chance to witness or absolve Yuta. He has no extra information or new arguments anyway, just a sense of lingering unease. By the time the sun sets, they reach an outpost that's on high alert. Even with the sensors at its perimeter, 4 rangers stand guard around the building. "This is where I leave you," Ryback says as they withdraw their Pokémon. He shakes each of their hands. "Get some well-earned rest tonight, and stay safe on your way to Cerulean." "You're not going to spend the night?" Leaf asks. "Maybe have that drink?" He smiles. "No, I should fly back soon. It's going to be all hands on deck for a while." "Well, thanks for the escort," Red says. "And the fossils, especially mine." "Don't mention it. Just be sure to message me if you end up visiting Cinnabar. I'd be curious to know if they can work with them." The trio agree and say goodnight. After Ryback takes off on his Pidgeot, they introduce themselves to the rangers inside, then go to the visitors' room and put their bags beside their cots before going to the dining room. There are a couple other trainers there, and they exchange polite small talk as they eat. No one seems interested in prolonged conversation, least of all Red, whose eyes are already drooping by the time he finishes his granola bars and apple. After he visits the bathroom and returns to their beds, he's happy to see that everyone's preparing for lights out. While the rest of the visiting trainers take turns washing up, Red sends his mom an email summarizing what happened and assuring her that they're all okay. He underplays his role in the fighting so as not to worry her, and after a moment decides against telling her about losing his Pokémon. He knows it would be more likely to result in a phone call, and he's not in the mood tonight. Red takes his journal out and flips back to the questions he wrote the first night of their journey, about trainers' bonds with their Pokémon. He re-examines his observations and questions in light of how he feels now, taking the time to really focus on his pain and sadness. Observation: I'm feeling remarkably attached to my Pokémon after such a short time with them. Question 2. Does it affect my objectivity when regarding them in other ways? Red frowns. He can't really say that it does. He wouldn't hesitate in the future to use his Pokémon in defense of wild attacks, even if it means losing them. Though the thought of losing Pichu or Charmander does make him feel a particularly sharp pain. But more than the Pokémon he lost, his thoughts are on the people who died, who they were, how they died, the people they left behind. He even finds himself thinking that way about Yuta, renegade though he is, and still alive, for now. Red flips to a new page and taps it with his pencil, then writes at the top, "Is sympathy for renegades normal?" After a moment's thought, he adds under it, "Should I care?" The questions aren't idle. He doesn't know what makes someone become a renegade, but it makes sense that being more sympathetic to them might be a warning sign. He certainly never saw the question addressed in public discourse, which signals to him that it's a taboo topic. He can't be the only one to wonder it, but maybe others have already learned that it gets them strange looks and hostile responses if they air their concerns. He wonders if he should ask Leaf. She seems to care about things like this more than he does, or at least have thought about them at length, unlike Blue. Red writes himself a reminder to ask her privately, then takes his phone out and starts to search online forums for similar questions. For a moment, he hesitates with the word renegade in the search bar, remembering conspiracy theories where people's search topics are aggregated to catch illegal activity, then decides to press on. All he's doing is asking questions, and he can always say he's looking for academic curiosity. Just as he starts to browse the results page, however, his phone chimes and vibrates in his hands, causing him to jump. He calms his racing heart by reminding himself it's probably just his mom. He considers ignoring it until tomorrow, then sighs and closes his search page to check. It's a message from CoreNet, a formal one telling him that Leader Misty has reviewed the witnessing and that the execution was carried out. It goes on to thank him for his service, but Red turns off his phone before finishing it, gaze up at the ceiling. "You okay?" Leaf asks from the cot to his left. Blue looks over from their other side, still flossing his teeth. "Utah," Red says, and debates a number of ways to finish the sentence before simply saying, "It's done." The other two are silent, and Red wonders if now, at last, they'd speak about it. Instead, the last trainer straggles back in and asks if everyone's ready for him to turn the lights off. The rest of the room agrees, and people begin exchanging goodnights. Red lies down and pulls the covers over himself with some relief, feeling too tired to get into the topic anyway. Instead of falling asleep, though, his thoughts churn in slow circles, replaying the day's events and always ending with Utah's witnessing. Thinking about his potential friends, his family, how they would get the news, how they would feel, how he would if it were him, how he felt after Dad died. Red tosses and turns as the room around him slowly goes quiet and still, with the occasional rustling and shifting. He can hear Blue snoring before long, though Leaf seems just as restless as him. Eventually, he realizes that if he's not going to get any rest, at least he should be productive. He slips out of bed and tiptoes between the cots until he can emerge into the brightly lit hallway. Rangers at outposts sleep in shifts, with a third of the staff resting at any given time, but when he passes the sleep quarters, the doors are open and the beds are empty. The outpost would be on high alert until the mountain calms down from the recent influx of rampaging wild Pokemon. Red goes to the dining hall, where a pair of rangers are eating quietly. He nods to them and sits at the table with his phone out, staring down at the screen. Ever since he finished his Spinnerack research, he's felt conflicted and aimless. Finding a journal to publish it would take a lot of time and energy, and he knows he has to do it at some point. But he hasn't been able to find the motivation between everything that's been going on. He could blame the distractions and dangers of traveling, but the truth is, his heart isn't in it. After spending so much time and effort getting funding for his project, even the idea of delving back into more paperwork saps his will. So, first step is admitting the problem. He's been procrastinating. And the reason is simple. Despite the potential, far-off rewards, at the end of the day, what interests him is learning and testing ideas, not getting published. He wants a researcher license so he can have more resources to do science. But it's hard to motivate himself if it means hours of ancillary work. Now what's he going to do about it? There's no point in wishing for a better work ethic, and trying to force himself to just buckle down and do it might not be the most effective way to move forward. What he needs is a compromise, a new project to focus on. Yes, that would do it. Work that he can feel energized by but won't take up all his time. That way he can swap between the work that's less fun and the one that's more exciting. "You okay, kid?" Red looks up to see one of the rangers looking at him. "Huh?" "You've been sitting there zoned out for 10 minutes. Red smiles. "Sorry, yeah, just tired. Don't push yourself so hard. If you're tired, get some sleep." "Thanks." Red looks back at the empty search bar on his screen, still smiling. Sleep? How could he sleep now? His mind is fully awake and burning with ideas for his next research project. Psychics. He still thinks they hold the key, or at least one of the keys, to understanding Pokemon, humans, and reality as a whole. He needs to keep his research focused in that direction, and that means studying psychic Pokemon directly. Spinarak aren't even psychic in the strictest sense, they just have some shared abilities. If he really wants to learn what sets psychics apart, he needs to study full-fledged psychic Pokemon. The problem is, trainers with psychic Pokemon are rare. He won't be able to ask for dozens of volunteers to bring him test subjects. He's going to need to get a fair amount himself. And around Cerulean City, that means one thing. He's going to need a lot of Abra, one of the hardest Pokemon to catch in all of Kanto. Red begins to research, not stopping until well into the night. Thanks to increased ranger and trainer activity, by morning the mountain's threat level returns to normal, and the next few days of travel go by quickly. Red begins to drink more tea, and even coffee where it's offered free, though the bitter taste is a chore to acquire. Still, it helps him get extra work done at night and stay alert during the day. If Blue or Leaf notice the bags under Red's eyes, they don't mention it. Their thoughts are occupied on other things in any case. Leaf's follower count doubled after the mayor's interview, then doubles again by the end of the day as her article gets more and more hits. By the next morning, she has almost as many as Blue, despite his own bump of notoriety. Leaf begins to occasionally read comments to her article out loud, and after the three discuss them a bit, write a response. At one point, she calls Red's mom to ask if she should respond to a popular priest's post, and after tailoring her reply over the course of a day, the subsequent jump after posting it makes her following surpass the youngest Oaks. To Blue's credit, he doesn't begrudge her the increased fame, and only trains that much harder while on the road, determined to be ready to take the Cerulean Gym by storm, the way he did Pewter's. He promises Red and Leaf that he won't be challenging Misty on his first day there, but will only make it clear that he can if he wants to. "Is Kamuri your lead, or your trump?" Red asks as he watches Blue run through drills with the Shiftry during one of their rest stops. "If I can sweep with him, I will," Blue says. "But I know they're going to throw some bulk at me, and I'll have to wear that down with Gon and Maturin first. Ion will be the trump. If I don't reveal an electric type right away, they might think I don't have one. Thanks again for him, Leaf." "Of course. Just make sure you treat him right." Leaf tosses nuts for Scamp to catch and bring back to her without eating them, rewarding him each time with a different nut than the one she threw. "No worries there. I've got big plans for this little shinx. I was pretty disappointed about not getting a Pikachu in Viridian." He eyes Red's Pichu as it sits perched on his hat. He's still afraid to walk around on his own? Red shrugs. Or he just likes to be on high places. "Well, I hope he evolves soon. They're featherweights until they do." "He'll evolve when he's ready." Red reaches a hand up and rubs the electric mouse's fur. "They need to feel safe and cared for before they can," Leaf says. "He's obviously going to be a challenge in that respect." "Well, he had a pretty traumatic capture," Red says. "And I don't plan on putting him in real combat until he does evolve, so it might be a while anyway." After losing his Rattata and Spearow, Red feels particularly protective of his Pichu now. He still hasn't named any of his Pokemon, and part of him is wondering if he's resisting simply so it isn't harder if he loses them. It's a thought he doesn't have time to contemplate now, so he just writes himself a reminder for later. Flipping through the pages, he's starting to feel overwhelmed by all the things he needs to take the time to research and think about. For now, though, he's set on focusing on his next research project and getting his last one published. Red rarely traveled when he was younger. Since his dad was so often away from home and his mom wasn't a trainer, he mostly stayed in Pallet Town unless Professor Oak brought him along on one of their family trips. As such, he's been to almost as many cities and towns in the past month as in the rest of his life combined. And when they finally catch sight of Cerulean City a few days after leaving the dig site, Red feels a growing sense of excitement to finally visit the famous tourist spot. As the trio make their way down the slopes of the mountains, Cerulean City stretches out ahead of them like a sprawl of loosely tossed metal and glass. Unlike Viridian or Pewter, with their tightly packed buildings and busy streets, Cerulean is spread out, with 4 major pockets of high rises and the occasional skyscraper divided by wide green suburban areas. Within a day, they're walking through outlying residential neighborhoods that are similar to other cities. But as soon as they pass into the first urban areas, Cerulean West, the soul of the city becomes clear. The sidewalks are wide and flanked by shops, restaurants, and stalls that an assortment of people seem constantly on their way in or out of. Double-decked buses are a continuous presence on the roads, shuttling people to and from every which way. Through the bottom level's windows, Red can see people looking bored or engrossed in their phone or a book, while the people on the top are often standing and taking pictures of their surroundings. He knew Cerulean got thousands of visitors a day, but he expected them to be more concentrated in Cerulean North along the coast of the bay. But as they make their way through the city to find a shopping mall to replenish their supplies, it becomes obvious that the shining beaches aren't all the city has to offer. They pass an ostentatious theater house on one side, advertising 2 musicals and a play, then a high-priced department store with glass walls. Some people have small Pokemon with them, hanging off of shoulders, in backpacks, or at the end of leashes, and others are using the streets to ride their Pokemon in the reserved lane. As they pass a music store, a famous pop star suddenly appears beside them, singing her heart out. Red stares over his shoulder, amazed at how far localized hologram technology has come. "Hey, Blue, you know we're rooting for you, right?" Red says. "You go in there and you get that badge. But if you don't..." "Right away," Leaf says, face pressed up against the window of a bike store as they walk by. "If it takes you a try or 2, or 3, it's okay, We're here for you." Red puts his hand on Blue's shoulder, gaze distracted by a street magician who throws a huge velvet cloth over a machoke, then whisks it off to reveal 2 Machop, one standing on another's shoulders. "You take another month if you need." Or 2. Blue shrugs Red's hand off with a grin. "You guys go nuts. If we have to stick around that long, I'm going to Nugget Road and trying for some gold. Or better yet, hunting through the tall grass along the bay. There are some prime catching spots up there." "Well, we're definitely going there before you challenge Misty," Red says. "I know what my next research subject is going to be. Abra." Blue laughs. "That might take you more than a couple months." Leaf frowns. "I looked them up after seeing the renegades, but they weren't listed as too rare. Finding one's not the problem. You can probably see a dozen in a day. Catching them is." "Ooh, they're natural teleporters?" "From birth." "Not to worry, my friends, for I," Red says, "have a plan." "A plan, you say?" Leaf rubs her chin. "A clever plan." "Tried and true?" "Well, no. That's what makes it so clever. As far as I could tell, no one else has tried it." "So, it's more of an experiment." "Yes, a clever experiment." "Uh-oh," Blue mutters. "Hey, most of them have been fine. I've spent the past few nights researching this, and I really think it'll work." "It's not going to get us surrounded by Pikachu, is it?" Leaf asks, "because that clever plan worked a bit too well." "Don't worry, there aren't any Pikachu around here," Red says as he steps briefly onto the street to go around a light pole. Leaf narrows her eyes. "That was a suspiciously narrow defense." "Fine. So there's a non-zero chance that the experiment will have negative consequences. Such is the life of a trainer. Where's your spirit of adventure?" "I don't have one, and neither do you." Leaf frowns as someone jostles her while walking by. "I mean, beyond what it takes to go on a trainer journey, of course." "Okay, where's your spirit of intellectual curiosity?" She smiles. "Well, yeah, I am curious." Blue raises a hand. "I'm not." "Ah, but you have a spirit of adventure." Blue hesitates, then lowers his hand. "Yeah, all right. If it works, we'd make bank, and I want to buy a bike. So what's the plan?" They turn a corner and see the shopping mall on the other side of the street. "I'm glad you asked." "The problem," Red explains as they restock their toiletries and basic traveling staples, "is that there are few attacks that can connect faster than thought. In order to get close enough to even hit an Abra with anything that might hold it still, you'd already have to be in range of their psychic senses. And from there, they just need the slightest excuse to teleport away. Even sufficiently aggressive thoughts not directed at them have been known to scare them off. To catch one, you either need to be a dark trainer with a dark Pokemon who gets lucky enough to sneak up on one without them hearing. Huge waste of time. Blue says as they reach the supermarket floor. Wouldn't waste a day of training with Kemery just to maybe catch one. Or you need a way to stop them from teleporting before they even realize you're there, without getting close enough for them to detect your thoughts. Sound, Leaf says as they pick out fresh fruit and head over to the boxes of meal bars. You want to use Wigglytuff to put them to sleep from a long distance? Yeah, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Red grabs a couple boxes of peanut butter-covered granola, then decides to try a honey-glazed one too. I was going to say, we can't just walk around with a singing Wigglytuff and hope that we find an Abra. Besides being a hazard to others, we'd also be mostly defenseless against any wild Pokémon that aren't affected by the singing. Not just that, Red says as they make their purchases and take a moment to store them in their food containers. Others have tried things like it before. According to his research, Abra can detect incoming threats by the responses of surrounding Pokémon. For example, if an Abra detects all the Pokémon to the west of it losing consciousness one by one in its direction, it'll teleport away. If it detects Pokémon losing consciousness in every direction around it, it'll teleport away. If it detects a stronger mental presence, it'll teleport away. If it hears the wind rustle some leaves and drop an apple to the ground, it'll teleport away, presumably because it thinks it might be a dark Pokémon sneaking up on it. It just goes to show how strong a force natural selection can be, Red says. When you have such a powerful survival tool against so many deadly predators and threats, the Abra that are quickest to use it are the most likely to survive and breed and pass that skittishness down, especially when there's virtually no downside. They're light sleepers too, Blue says as they take the elevator up to the trainer supply floor. So what's the plan? We can't go running around hoping to find them. We need them to come to us. A few years ago, a professor tagged some Abra and released them back into the wild to track their movements. It took a while to find something that would be taken along with the teleportation intact, but eventually she was able to monitor the Abra as they popped around a field day to day, foraging and breeding and escaping danger. But there wasn't any pattern, right? Leaf asks as she puts some potions in her shopping basket. How'd you know? They wouldn't still be so hard to catch if there was. Yep, no pattern at all. Except for one, newly born Abra tended to teleport back to fewer places, confirming the idea that Abra could only teleport to places they've been before. But there was nothing to indicate how they chose, in the moment, where to go. Blue picks up a small pouch of Pokeballs and tosses another to Red and Leaf. So, how does that help us? It doesn't, Red says, catching his and putting it in his basket. It was pretty demoralizing, to be honest. But it did lead me to the core of my idea. If we can't predict where they'll teleport, we need to control where they don't. Picture a field with a random amount of Abra sprinkled through it, teleporting around. What happens if you and a Wigglytuff start walking eastward as it sings? They'll start teleporting away as Pokémon begin to lose consciousness near them in that direction, Leaf says. But not in a controlled direction, so some might go north or south instead of all east. If we had more than one Wigglytuff, couldn't we try to come from all directions and herd them into a middle area? Assuming we don't have to worry about other trainers or resistant Pokémon attacking us. It could work, but since we only have yours, I have a better idea, Red says. Picture the field again. Can you just tell us? Blue interrupts as he compares the labels on 2 antidote bottles. I'm a bit busy. Better yet, just draw it. Red smiles and takes out his phone to sketch a picture with his finger. Leaf leans forward to watch over his shoulder, which causes Red to mess up a few times, distracted by the feel of her hair brushing his arm. Once the square field is drawn, Red makes a circle in the middle. This is us with your Wigglytuff in the middle, and the radius of it singing. What if we put speakers here, here, here? He draws X's around it, 6 in total, then draws circles around those. With each playing the sound of a Mightyena or Houndoom, any Abra in that area will teleport away in a random direction, and with so many zones repelling them, we'll eventually get some that land in the middle with us, where they'll be put to sleep before they can recognize the danger. He finishes drawing and shows it to Blue. All right, first quest. We'll put out a localized message to see if any trainers are in the area, and warn them away. Then we'll sync the speakers to emit their sound at the same time. The two of us will rotate around Leaf's Wigglytuff with our earplugs in searching for any Pokemon that come into range of its singing. Leaf will stay with her, so we can message her to stop the singing right away if we're attacked by a Pokemon that's not affected by it, and to catch any between us. Blue frowns through his explanation. Okay, 6th question. Or 7th, whatever. Who's paying for these speakers? I already looked up the price. I can buy them all if you guys don't want to. Catching just one Abra would make up for the cost. I'll buy 2, Leaf says as they make their way to the checkout counters. I think this might actually work. Yeah, count me in too, on one condition. Blue puts his basket on the tray and starts the auto scan, then swipes his card. You gotta ask Gramps what he thinks of it. Way ahead of you, buddy. Wait, you're not going to try this alone, are you? Of course not, Professor. I'm including Blue and Leaf in that alone, Red. Yeah, I knew that, obviously. Listen to me, Red. Under no circumstances are you to execute such a wide-scale public experiment without oversight. Do you understand? I'm shocked that you'd think so little of me, Professor. Shocked. Don't make me call your mother. Blue sighs. So much for keeping the method a secret, if it works. Wouldn't be able to do that anyway, if we're alerting the area, Leaf says, and turns back to Red. So, we're calling the Rangers? Red finishes withdrawing his purchases and snaps his container ball closed. We're calling the Rangers. We can't help you. Red's heart sinks at the Ranger's flat, uncompromising tone. He shifts his phone to the other ear, trying to keep pace with Blue and Leaf as they walk toward the nearby Pokemon Center. You don't have to help us. I just thought, you want us to spread ourselves out over a radius so wide we wouldn't even be able to see each other, while you set up an audio hazard zone, purposefully, in the middle of where we'd all be. It's just a precaution. We wouldn't be doing it if we actually think something bad will happen. Red sees Blue and Leaf glance at him, clearly able to guess how the conversation is going. Isn't it better to be on site ahead of time just in case? It's too big a job for our outpost alone, and we're not calling in Rangers from another one just to watch your experiment. We have to be ready for actual emergencies, not manufactured ones. Just playing the Mighty Enna cries might cause a panic or rampage across the whole field. No, I looked into that, see? None of the Pokemon here have Mighty Enna listed as a natural predator except Abra, so they won't. Kid, the answer's no. Get a bunch of trainers together and coordinate something if you can, but we can't do the job alone. Red feels heat creeping up his neck and clenches his teeth before he says something stupid. I understand. Thanks anyway. He closes the call with a grunt of disgust. Told you I should have called, Blue says. You didn't even mention that I have a badge. Red sighs. You know what the worst part of this is? That we just spent $60 each for the speakers we can't use? No, there are plenty of other uses for them. I was thinking of getting some ever since we used sound to scare the chew off in Viridian. Red's down to $150 after their shopping was done, which isn't as bad as he was expecting when he thought he'd have to buy them alone. The worst part is, if I decided to go out into the wild and open a jar of honey to attract hordes of Pokemon, no one would bat an eye. I mean, some might advise against it, but it's an accepted practice for skilled trainers. But experiment with something new that can't possibly be more dangerous than what's already an accepted strategy. Leaf smiles. To be fair, I know. I don't actually know what'll happen. That's why it's an experiment. What now then? Try to get other trainers to help? Maybe. I'll have to think about it. Red watches night drape itself over the city like a reluctant curtain, sad to end another day over the bustling metropolis. Cerulean is more than ready for the dark, however, and the streets light up with colorful signs and backlit storefronts. They're near the local downtown now, where the city is most compact before spreading back out into the suburbs all around it. Maybe I'll put a post up in the city forum, see if anyone's interested by tomorrow or the next day. Well, it'll take us the morning to get to Cerulean North anyway, Blue says. I'm going to hit the gym in the afternoon, so I won't be free until the next day. And I've got a backlog of correspondence to get to when I have access to a real keyboard. I think I'm going to get a laptop tomorrow on our way up. Yeah, all right. Red's mood darkens as he thinks of the long night and day he has ahead of him of continuing his attempts to get his research published. They reach the center and drop off their Pokemon, then head to the nearby trainer house and file into the crowded lobby to register themselves. After some quick meals in the mess hall, the trio says goodnight at the elevators and head upstairs to drop their spare clothes in the laundry rooms and take some long-awaited showers. Afterward, Red flops onto his bunk bed and takes out his phone as his hair dries. Blue climbs the ladder to the bed above him to drop off his bag, then climbs back down. "You're not going to train, are you?" Red asks. He thought Blue dropped all his Pokemon at the center. "Nah, Sabrina's taking a challenge match tonight. I'm going to the lobby for the big screens. Wanna come?" "I'm okay, thanks." Red watches Blue leave, then stares blankly at his phone's display of another publishing journal. Eventually he realizes he's not reading it, mind still on Sabrina, the most powerful human psychic in the region, and possibly the world. He frowns and opens a new page. Something different tonight. If he's going to catch an Abra soon, he needs to start training his psychic powers, what little he can without a tutor. He doesn't know how his block will interact with his own psychic Pokemon trying to communicate with him, but he needs to be as prepared as possible. Red starts searching for pages that detail rudimentary psychic powers and how to practice them. He keeps scrolling down lists to try and find something as basic as possible, but finds nothing that he thinks he's capable of. Eventually, he finds a page titled "How to Tell If You're Sensitive," and opens that. From what Narud said, Red is a full psychic, just without access to his powers. Not a sensitive, someone with powers so weak that they're mostly non-existent. Still, maybe for practical purposes, he should consider himself one for now, and see if there's anything here that might help. He reads through some pages detailing different sensations a person might have, or circumstances they might find themselves in, that could tell them if they're a sensitive. Red occasionally gets a familiar sensation upon reading some of them, like the feeling of being connected with someone, even a stranger, or always feeling like he could tell what their emotional state was. He's probably just fooling himself through confirmation bias, though. Anyone in the room with Yuta would have been able to feel the man's desperation. That was just an expression anyway. He can't consider interactions with his mom relevant. She's family, and he spends more time with her than anyone. And for some refuting evidence, he can think of a dozen times at least when he misread even his closest friend, Blue. Who's dark. Huh. I guess I haven't really given that a chance to fully register, after finding out I was psychic. He puts his phone down and closes his eyes, taking a moment to think back on their friendship and update all the experiences he can remember through the new lens of the two semi-recent discoveries. If Red's been operating off of subtle, psychic cues from people his whole life, but not getting any from Blue, then that would account for some of their arguments. Not all, of course, or even most. Maybe even not any. He certainly has no evidence that his impressions of people's emotions are anything more than his imagination. But it's still something to keep in mind moving forward. Red keeps looking through the various sites and pages detailing the difference between sensitives and non-sensitives, and the even bigger gulf between psychics and sensitives, which the sites, often run by psychic groups, always seem to couch in sympathetic tones. "The poor dears," Red mutters, drawing a glance from a pair of trainers walking by his bed. No matter what they do, the sites don't quite say, they'll never be true psychics. Red can see why that might be a common question or hope, but it still comes off as patronizing to him, as someone who finds himself caught in such an odd middle space. He knows he'd find it irritating if he was just a sensitive. No one likes being looked down on by a group that considers themselves obviously superior. It's especially problematic, since they're the ones that are shaping the narrative. In fact, Red changes his search terms and suddenly finds sites with a very different framing. Most look less official, but there are dozens of blogs and pages dedicated to exploring their own theories of sensitives versus psychics. According to many of them, the one isn't a weaker form of the other, but a different one altogether. The way ghost Pokemon attack people's emotions and psychics attack their thoughts. Red frowns. That divide always seemed strange to him, but if it's true, then obviously practicing psychic techniques wouldn't help a sensitive. The problem is, These sites seem full of unsupported claims and mysticism masquerading as science. He can't find any research backing them, and eventually gives up and returns to the more reliable sites. Red eventually finds one that recommends meditation and awareness exercises to any sensitive interested in exploring their powers, and he decides to attempt them. His therapist suggested meditation when he was younger, but it hadn't really worked for him then. Now it might be worth a second try. He looks around at the room, where a dozen other trainers are chatting quietly or preparing for bed, and decides it's quiet enough. He plugs in his earphones and waits for the soothing voice to begin walking him through it, only to have the phone's message chime directly in his ear. Red's eyes fly open, and he curses as he pulls the earplugs out. After a moment, his scowl fades, and he sits up to read the article Leaf linked him to. There's an embedded video of Leader Brock, but Red doesn't have to play it, as the caption under it reads, "Leader Brock urges peace and unity as recent public politics turn violent." Apparently, the Pewter Museum was vandalized a few hours ago, and just this morning the religious leader Leaf wrote the open letter response to called on Pewter's faithful to reject its lies and the propaganda of foreign influences. Well, Red says as he scrolls down to see the vitriolic comments, some defending Leaf's article and calling for an investigation, but many more condemning her, the mayor, and the museum. Shit.